The bustling Starbucks on Fifth Avenue was just beginning its morning rush when Angela Chen walked through the glass doors, her tailored navy suit and briefcase reflecting her decade-long career as one of the city's most accomplished attorneys. The autumn air had given her cheeks a slight flush as she joined the line, mentally reviewing her upcoming court presentation while the rich aroma of coffee filled the air. The cafe buzzed with Robert Wilson's morning at his law firm started with an angry phone call from his managing partner. The viral video of his racist outburst at Starbucks had spread across social media platforms overnight, with millions of views and thousands of outraged comments. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the notifications flooding his phone. News outlets wanted comments, former clients were distancing themselves, and his reputation was crumbling by the minute. The senior partners called an emergency meeting. Wilson sat at the large conference table, his usual confidence replaced by nervous fidgeting. The firm's reputation was at stake. Other lawyers walked past his office, whispers and sideways glances following him everywhere. His secretary had called in sick, though he suspected she simply didn't want to face him. During lunch, which he ate alone in his office, Wilson received another blow. The State Bar Association had opened an ethics investigation based on multiple complaints. His behavior violated the professional code of conduct, they said. The prestigious law firm he helped build couldn't afford this kind of scandal. As he prepared for his upcoming corporate case, Wilson tried to focus on the massive stack of documents before him. This was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. He needed to be at his best. But his mind kept drifting back to that morning at Starbucks. He'd let his mask slip, revealing prejudices he usually kept carefully hidden behind expensive suits and polished manners. His phone buzzed again. Another cancellation from a long-term client. In light of recent events, the email read, "We feel it's best to seek different legal representation." Wilson loosened his tie, feeling the walls closing in. 25 years of carefully cultivated relationships were unraveling because of 5 minutes of uncontrolled anger. The young associates who usually competed for his attention now took different routes to avoid passing his office. The cleaning staff skipped his room entirely. In just one day, he'd become a pariah in his own firm. Even his country club had sent a discreet email about reviewing his membership. That evening, as Wilson stayed late trying to salvage what he could of his cases, he received the final blow of the day. His biggest client, a Fortune 500 company, sent a termination notice. Their commitment to diversity and inclusion, they explained, made it impossible to continue their relationship. Sitting in his darkened office, surrounded by legal awards and certificates that suddenly seemed meaningless, Wilson realized the true cost of his actions. His carefully constructed world of privilege and power was collapsing, and the worst part was knowing that tomorrow he would have to face a packed courtroom for the biggest case of his career. As he packed his briefcase, Wilson had no idea that karma wasn't finished with him yet. The next morning would bring an even bigger surprise, one that would make his current situation seem like just the beginning of his downfall. The universe was about to teach him a lesson in humility, and it would come from the very person he had so carelessly insulted. On the morning of the big corporate case, Angela quietly set up her documents at the plaintiff's table, having arrived early to prepare. The marble-floored courtroom was still mostly empty, with just a few early observers trickling in. She arranged her files methodically, each motion and precedent carefully tabbed and highlighted. As lead counsel representing a group of small business owners against a major corporation, she knew this case could change lives. Her clients, mostly immigrant entrepreneurs, had suffered significant losses due to predatory business practices. She had spent months building their case, working late nights and weekends to ensure every detail was perfect. Just then, the heavy wooden doors swung open. Robert Wilson strode in confidently, his head buried in his phone. He walked straight to the defense table, still not looking up. When he finally raised his eyes to scan the courtroom, his gaze locked with Angela's. The color drained from his face as recognition hit him like a physical blow. He fumbled with his briefcase, dropping several papers. His junior associate rushed to help him gather them, confused by his suddenly erratic behavior. Wilson's hands shook as he tried to organize his documents, stealing glances at Angela, who remained focused on her work, radiating calm professionalism. The courtroom began filling up. News of Wilson's racist outburst had spread through legal circles, and many had come to witness what promised to be an interesting day. Whispers and pointed looks followed Wilson as more lawyers and spectators entered. Some nodded respectfully to Angela, having seen the viral video of her composure during the incident. As the bailiff called the court to order, Wilson loosened his collar, sweating despite the room's cool temperature. The judge entered, and proceedings began. Angela rose to make her opening statement, her voice clear and confident. She laid out her client's case masterfully, without a single reference to the Starbucks incident. Wilson's opening statement, usually delivered with trademark swagger, came out stuttering and disorganized. He kept losing his train of thought, painfully aware of the irony of his situation. The same woman he had deemed unworthy of sharing his coffee shop space was now demonstrating superior legal expertise in his own professional arena. The morning session revealed a striking contrast. Angela's meticulous preparation and eloquent arguments against Wilson's uncharacteristically scattered defense. His usual courtroom intimidation tactics felt hollow, especially when trying to discredit the testimony of Angela's immigrant clients. By lunch break, the gallery was packed. Legal interns texted updates to their colleagues, and several senior partners from various firms had slipped in to watch. Wilson's professional downfall was playing out in real time, not through angry social media posts or client cancellations, but through pure legal skill and karma's perfect timing. The social media storm around Wilson's racist outburst had reached its peak by the fourth day. Local news stations picked up the story, showing clips of him berating Angela at Starbucks alongside his prestigious law firm bio. His face appeared on every major news website, with headlines highlighting how a top attorney had been caught showing his true colors. Wilson's firm was flooded with calls from concerned clients and media outlets. The managing partners held another emergency meeting, this time without him present. The video had been viewed over 5 million times, with celebrities and influencers sharing it and condemning his behavior. Legal blogs were having a field day, dissecting every second of his tirade. At home, Wilson's personal life was crumbling. His wife was mortified, their teenage children refusing to talk to him after being bombarded with messages from classmates about their father's behavior. His neighbor, who sat on the board of their homeowners association, pointedly avoided eye contact during their morning routines. The State Bar Association's investigation intensified. They received dozens of formal complaints, including some from former clients who came forward with their own stories of experiencing subtle discrimination. Previous settlements that had been quietly handled now faced renewed scrutiny. Meanwhile, Angela's reputation soared. Legal publications praised her composure during the incident and her professional handling of the situation. Young law students shared her story as an example of grace under pressure. Several civil rights organizations reached out, asking her to speak at their events. Back at the courthouse, Angela continued presenting her case with unwavering focus. She introduced evidence showing how Wilson's client had systematically targeted immigrant-owned businesses, her clear presentation making complex financial data accessible to the jury. The contrast between her professionalism and Wilson's recent behavior wasn't lost on anyone. Wilson's senior partners watched from the gallery, their presence adding to his discomfort. They had already begun damage control, distancing the firm from his actions. Junior associates who once competed for his mentorship now openly sought guidance from other partners. The media coverage expanded beyond legal circles. Social commentators discussed how the incident highlighted ongoing discrimination in professional spaces. Wilson's outburst became a case study in how privilege and prejudice could hide behind expensive suits and prestigious titles. By week's end, Wilson's carefully constructed world had completely unraveled. His country club membership was suspended, speaking engagements were canceled, and his position as a board member for several charitable organizations was under review. The consequences of those few minutes of unfiltered hatred continued to multiply, while Angela's methodical dismantling of his case in court proved that true professional excellence knows no racial bounds. The fifth day of the trial dawned with thick tension in courtroom 304. Wilson arrived looking disheveled, his usual pristine appearance showing signs of strain. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and his once commanding presence had shrunk considerably. Angela was already at her table, going through surveillance footage that showed questionable practices at her clients' businesses. The evidence would prove how Wilson's corporate client had systematically harassed and intimidated small business owners, particularly targeting those from minority communities. As Angela played the videos for the jury, Wilson's discomfort grew visible. Each piece of evidence seemed to mirror his own recent behavior, revealing patterns of discrimination and abuse of power. The jury members exchanged knowing looks, the parallels impossible to ignore. During cross-examination, Wilson's usual aggressive questioning style fell flat. His voice trembled when addressing Angela's witnesses, particularly when questioning an elderly Vietnamese shop owner who described years of corporate bullying. The judge had to ask Wilson several times to speak up, his confidence evaporating with each passing hour. The gallery was packed again, but this time with small business owners from across the city. They watched intently as Angela methodically presented internal company emails showing a pattern of targeting minority-owned businesses. Wilson's attempts to object seemed half-hearted, as if he knew each objection would only draw more attention to the damaging evidence. During the afternoon break, Wilson overheard two junior associates discussing how his viral video had become required viewing in a law school ethics class. Their quick silence when they noticed him only emphasized his growing isolation. Even the courthouse staff, who had once treated him with deference, now served him with cold professionalism. The day's proceedings ended with Angela presenting expert testimony from a civil rights attorney about systemic discrimination in corporate practices. Wilson sat slumped in his chair, watching his professional reputation crumble alongside his client's defense. His phone continually buzzed with messages from the firm's partners, each one increasing the pressure he felt. As people filed out of the courtroom, Wilson remained seated, staring at his scattered notes. The irony wasn't lost on him. His prejudices had not only exposed his true character, but had placed him opposite one of the most competent attorneys he ever faced, in a case that was rapidly becoming about much more than corporate malpractice. The universe had orchestrated the perfect lesson in humility, placing him exactly where he needed to be to understand the full impact of his actions. As he finally packed up his briefcase, Wilson realized that tomorrow's proceedings would only bring more revelations, and his downfall was far from over. Angela rose to deliver her closing arguments, the courtroom falling into complete silence. Her voice carried strength and conviction as she wove together 6 days of testimony and evidence. Each point she made highlighted not just the corporate wrongdoing, but the deeper systemic issues that had allowed such practices to flourish. Behind her perfectly structured argument lay countless hours of preparation. She discussed internal emails showing deliberate targeting of minority-owned businesses, surveillance footage of intimidation tactics, and financial records revealing discriminatory practices. The jury remained focused, several members taking detailed notes. Wilson watched from the defense table, his usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. When his turn came to present the defense's closing argument, he stumbled through his notes. His normally powerful courtroom presence had diminished to that of a nervous first-year lawyer. The corporate executives seated behind Wilson shifted uncomfortably as he failed to counter Angela's most damaging points. His argument lacked coherence, jumping between weak defenses and half-formed rebuttals. Twice, the judge had to ask him to speak up, his voice having dropped to nearly a whisper. In her rebuttal, Angela delivered the final blow. She projected a timeline showing the systematic nature of the corporation's actions, each incident building upon the last. The jury's expressions showed they understood the bigger picture. This wasn't just about business practices, but about fundamental fairness and equality. As Angela concluded, several jury members nodded subtly. The gallery, packed with affected business owners and legal observers, sat in appreciative silence. Even Wilson's own clients, the corporate executives, were whispering urgently among themselves, their faces showing growing concern. Wilson loosened his tie, aware that his defense had crumbled. The past week had stripped away his professional armor, revealing the consequences of both his personal prejudices and his clients' discriminatory practices. His phone buzzed continuously, likely more messages from his increasingly worried firm partners. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Angela organized her materials with characteristic precision. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Wilson's nervous fidgeting. The courtroom buzzed with whispered predictions of a verdict, most expecting it would come quickly. As the judge gave final instructions to the jury, Wilson realized that this case represented more than just another corporate lawsuit. It had become a turning point, where privilege and prejudice faced justice in its most fitting form, through the very system he had once thought he commanded. The jury returned surprisingly quickly, filing into the courtroom after just 3 hours of deliberation. Their faces were stern, and the foreman held a thick stack of papers containing their decision. The air felt electric as everyone stood for the judge's entrance. Wilson's hands trembled visibly as he rose. The corporate executives behind him looked equally tense, their usual air of authority replaced by genuine concern. Angela maintained her composure, standing tall beside her clients who had fought so long for this moment. The foreman handed the verdict to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. As the judge reviewed the documents, the silence in the courtroom became almost physical. Even the usual shuffling of papers and quiet whispers had ceased. The judge began reading the verdict aloud. On all counts, the jury found in favor of Angela's clients. The awarded damages were staggering: $18.5 million in compensatory damages, plus an additional $7 million in punitive damages. Several jurors looked directly at Wilson's clients as the amounts were read. But the verdict wasn't the only blow. The jury had also recommended a formal investigation into the corporation's broader business practices, citing evidence of systematic discrimination. Wilson slumped in his chair as his worst professional nightmare unfolded. The judge then addressed another matter. During the trial, evidence of Wilson's recent racist incident had been properly submitted to the court through legal channels. The judge announced that this behavior would be reported to the State Bar Association, adding to Wilson's already ongoing ethics investigation. As the courtroom erupted in muted celebrations, Wilson's corporate clients immediately distanced themselves, huddling with other lawyers they had waiting in the gallery. His junior associates quickly gathered their materials and left, avoiding eye contact. Angela thanked each juror as they exited, many of them offering congratulatory smiles. Her clients hugged each other, some wiping away tears of relief. Years of fighting against corporate bullying had finally paid off, their struggles validated by the justice system. Wilson remained alone at the defense table, staring at his laptop screen, but not really seeing it. In just 1 week, his actions at a coffee shop had triggered a cascade of consequences, culminating in this devastating professional defeat. As he finally stood to leave, he realized this verdict was more than just a loss. It was justice served on multiple levels. In the wake of the verdict, Wilson's law firm called an immediate partnership meeting. 20 senior partners sat around the mahogany conference table, their faces grave as they reviewed the damages of the past week. The viral video, combined with the devastating court loss, had become a liability they couldn't ignore. The managing partner delivered the news. Wilson's partnership was suspended pending review. His corner office was to be cleared out by the end of the day. Security watched as he packed his awards and personal items into cardboard boxes, a far cry from his usual commanding presence in the hallways. Meanwhile, Angela's victory made headlines across legal circles. The case was already being discussed in law schools, not just for its landmark damages, but as an example of how systemic discrimination could be successfully challenged in court. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests from legal publications. The State Bar Association accelerated their investigation into Wilson's conduct. Multiple witnesses from the Starbucks incident had submitted statements, along with previously silent victims of his discriminatory behavior. Former clients began speaking out about subtle comments and actions they'd previously dismissed. Wilson's social circle crumbled rapidly. His country club membership was officially revoked. Charitable organizations removed him from their boards. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. His wife filed for separation, unable to handle the constant public scrutiny and embarrassment. Angela's small business clients finally saw justice. The awarded damages would not only save their businesses, but would help rebuild their communities. Local news covered their stories, highlighting years of resilience against corporate bullying. Their victory became a symbol of hope for other minority business owners facing similar challenges. Legal forums buzzed with discussions about the case's implications. It set a precedent for holding corporations accountable for discriminatory practices. Young lawyers studied Angela's trial strategy, admiring how she'd maintained professionalism while systematically dismantling both the defense and deep-rooted prejudices. The corporate client terminated all ties with Wilson's firm, their own reputation now tarnished by association. Their board of directors announced a complete review of their business practices, hiring diversity consultants to address systemic issues exposed during the trial. As darkness fell on his last day at the firm, Wilson carried his boxes to his car alone. 25 years of legal career reduced to a few cardboard containers, while across town, Angela's victory celebration marked the beginning of positive change in the legal community. The State Bar Association reached their final decision 3 months after the trial. In a unanimous vote, they suspended Wilson's law license for 2 years, citing conduct unbecoming of the legal profession and clear evidence of discriminatory behavior. The decision made national headlines, becoming a landmark case in legal ethics. Wilson's personal life had completely unraveled. His divorce was finalized, and his children still refused to speak to him. His once luxurious penthouse was sold to cover legal fees and the collapse of his income. He moved into a small apartment, a dramatic fall from his former lifestyle. Angela's victory sparked real change. She established a legal advocacy group focusing on supporting minority business owners facing corporate discrimination. The group offered free legal consultations and worked to identify systemic patterns of prejudice in business practices. The corporate client underwent a complete restructuring. Their board hired new diversity officers, implemented mandatory sensitivity training, and created a fund to support minority-owned businesses. Their transformation became a model for other corporations facing similar issues. Law schools across the country added the case to their ethics curriculum. Students studied not just the legal strategy, but the broader implications of unchecked privilege and prejudice in the legal profession. Angela was invited to give guest lectures, sharing her insights on professional integrity and justice. The Starbucks where it all began put up a small plaque celebrating diversity and inclusion. The young barista who had faced Wilson's initial outburst was now in law school herself, inspired by Angela's example of grace under pressure. Wilson, humbled by his downfall, finally began therapy to address his deep-seated prejudices. He started volunteering at a community legal clinic, slowly learning to see beyond his previously narrow worldview. His journey from disgrace to redemption would be long, but it had begun. Local business owners who had previously feared speaking out about discrimination found their voices. Support groups formed, sharing resources and strategies for fighting corporate bullying. The ripple effects of the case continued to spread, touching lives far beyond the original verdict. 1 year later, Angela stood before a graduating law school class, delivering a commencement speech about integrity, justice, and the power of standing firm in the face of discrimination. Her message was clear. True legal excellence comes not from privilege or power, but from unwavering commitment to justice for all.